Good morning. Today's Bible reading comes from Genesis 37 through 39. Let's get into it. Get my reading glasses on, and then we'll get to moving. Meanwhile, Jacob had settled down where his father had lived, the land of Canaan. Joseph and his brothers. This is the story of Jacob. The story continues with Joseph, 17 years old at the time, helping out his brothers in herding the flocks. These were his half-brothers, actually, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah, and Joseph brought his father bad reports on them. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he was the son of his old age, and he made him an elaborately embroidered coat. When his brothers realized that their father loved him more than them, they grew to hate him. They wouldn't even speak to him. Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said, "Listen to this dream I had. We were all out in the field gathering bundles of wheat. All of a sudden, my bundle stood straight up, and your bundle circled around it and bowed down to mine." His brother said, "So, you're going to rule us? You're going to boss us around?" And they hated him more than ever because of his dreams and the way he talked. He had another dream and told this one also to his brothers. "I dreamt another dream. The sun and moon and 11 stars bowed down to me." When he told it to his father and brothers, his father reprimanded him. "What's with all this dreaming? Am I and your mother and your brothers all supposed to bow down to you?" Now his brothers were really jealous, but his father brooded over the whole business. His brothers had gone off to Shechem where they were pasturing their father's flocks. Israel said to Joseph, "Your brothers are with the flocks in Shechem. Come, I want to send you to them." Joseph said, "I'm ready." He said, "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are doing, and bring me back a report." He sent him off from the valley of Hebron to Shechem. A man met him as he was wandering through the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" "I'm trying to find my brothers. Do you have any idea where they are grazing their flocks?" The man said, "They left here, but I overheard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" So Joseph took off, tracked his brothers down, and found them in Dothan. They spotted him off in the distance, but by the time they got to him, they had cooked up a plot to kill him. The brothers were saying, "Here comes that dreamer. Let's kill him and throw him into one of the old cisterns. We can say that a vicious animal ate him up. We'll see what his dreams amount to." Reuben heard the brothers talking and intervened to save him. "We're not going to kill him. No murder. Go ahead and throw him in the cistern out here in the wild, but don't hurt him." Reuben planned to go back later and get him out and take him back to his father. When Joseph reached his brothers, they ripped off the fancy coat he was wearing, grabbed him, and threw him into a cistern. The cistern was dry. There wasn't any water in it. Then they sat down to eat their supper. Looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites on their way from Gilead, their camels loaded with spices, ointments, and perfumes to sell in Egypt. Judah said, "Brothers, what are we going to get out of our killing our brother and concealing the evidence? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let's not kill him. He is, after all, our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. By that time, the Midianite traders were passing by. His brothers pulled Joseph out of the cistern and sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took Joseph with them down to Egypt. Later, Reuben came back and went to the cistern. No Joseph. He ripped his clothes in despair. Beside himself, he went to his brother. "The boy's gone. What am I going to do?" They took Joseph's coat, butchered a goat, and dipped the coat in the blood. They took the fancy coat back to their father and said, "We found this. Look it over. Do you think this is your son's coat?" He recognized it at once. "My son's coat. A wild animal has eaten him. Joseph, torn limb from limb." Jacob tore his clothes in grief, dressed in rough burlap, and mourned his son a long, long time. His sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused their comfort. "I'll go to the grave mourning my son." Oh, how his father wept for him. In Egypt, the Midianites sold Joseph to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, manager of his household affairs. About that time, Judah separated from his brothers and hooked up with a man in Adullam named Hira. While there, Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite named Shua. He married her, they went to bed, she became pregnant, and had a son named She got pregnant again and had a son named Onan. She had still another son. She named this one Shelah. They were living in Kazeb when she had him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn. Her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn previously offended God, and God took his life. So Judah said to Onan, "Go and sleep with your brother's widow. It's the duty of a brother-in-law to keep your brother's line alive." But Onan knew that the child wouldn't be his. So whenever he slept with his brother's widow, he spilled his semen on the ground, so he wouldn't produce the child for his brother. God was much offended by what he did, and also took his life. So Judah stepped in and told his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow at home with your father until my son Shelah grows up." He was worried that Shelah would also grow up dead, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live with her father. Time passed. Judah's wife, Shua's daughter, died. When the time of mourning was over, Judah with his friend Hira of Adullam went to Timnah for the sheep shearing. Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law has gone to Timnah to shear his sheep." She took off her widow's clothes, put on a veil to disguise herself, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. She realized by now that even though Shelah was grown up, she wasn't going to be married to him. Judah saw her and assumed she was a prostitute, since she had veiled her face. He left the road and went over to her. He said, "Let me sleep with you." He had no idea that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you pay me?" "I'll send you," he said, "a kid goat from the flock." She said, "Not unless you give me a pledge until you send it." "So what would you want in the way of a pledge?" She said, "Your personal seal and cord, and the staff you carry." He handed them over to her and slept with her, and she got pregnant. She then left and went home. She removed her veil and put on her widow's clothes back on. Judah sent the kid goat by his friend from Adullam to recover the pledge from the woman, but he couldn't find her. He asked the men of that place, "Where's the prostitute that used to sit by the road here near Enaim?" They said, "There's never been a prostitute here." He went back to Judah and said, "I couldn't find her. The men there said there never has been a prostitute there." Judah said, "Let her have it then. If we keep looking, everyone will be poking fun at us. I kept my part of the bargain. I sent the kid goat, but you couldn't find her." 3 months or so later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law has been playing the whore, and now she's a pregnant whore." Judah yelled, "Get her out of here. Burn her up." As they brought her out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. "I'm pregnant by the man who owns these things. Identify them, please. Who's the owner of the seal and cord and the staff?" Judah saw that they were his. He said, "She's in the right. I'm in the wrong. I wouldn't let her marry my son Selah." He never slept with her again. When her time came to give birth, it turned out there were twins in her womb. As she was giving birth, one put his hand out. The midwife tied a red thread on his hand, saying, This one came out first, but then he pulled it back in and his brother came out. She said, "Oh, a breakout." So she named him Perez, breakout. Then his brother came out with the red thread on his hand. They named him Zerah, bright. After Joseph had been taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelites, Potiphar, an Egyptian, one of Pharaoh's officials, and the manager of his household, bought him from them. As it turned out, God was with Joseph and things went very well with him. He ended up living in the home of the Egyptian master. His master recognized that God was with him, saw that God was working for good in everything he did. He became very fond of Joseph and made him his personal aide. He put him in charge of all his personal affairs, turning everything over to him. From that moment on, God blessed the home of the Egyptian, all because of Joseph. The blessing of God spread over everything he owned, at home and in the fields, and all Potiphar had to concern himself with was eating 3 meals a day. Joseph was a strikingly handsome man. As time went on, his master's wife became infatuated with Joseph and one day said, "Sleep with me." He wouldn't do it. He said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here, my master doesn't give a second thought to anything that goes on here. He's put me in charge of everything he owns. He treats me as an equal. The only thing he hasn't turned over to me is you. You're his wife, after all. How could I violate his trust and sin against God?" She pestered him day after day after day, but he stood his ground. He refused to go to bed with her. On one of these days, he came to the house to do his work, and none of the household servants happened to be there. She grabbed him by his cloak, saying, "Sleep with me." He left his coat in her hand and ran out of the house. When she realized that he had left his coat in her hand and run outside, she called to her house servants. "Look, this Hebrew shows up, and before you know it, he's trying to seduce us. He tried to make love to me, but I yelled out as loud as I could. With all my yelling and screaming, he left his coat beside me here and ran outside. She kept his coat right there until his master came home. She told him the same story. She said, "The Hebrew slave, the one you brought to us, came after me and tried to use me for his plaything. When I yelled and screamed, he left his coat with me and ran outside." When his masters heard his wife's story, telling him, "These are the things your slave did to me," he was furious. Joseph's master took him and threw him into jail, in the jail where the king's prisoners were locked up. But there in jail, God was still with Joseph. He reached out in kindness to him. He put him on good terms with the head jailer. The head jailer put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. He ended up managing the whole operation. The head jailer gave Joseph free rein, never even checked on him, because God was with him. Whatever he did, God made sure it worked out for the best. And that is it for today's Bible reading. As always, get in touch with God today, and I will see you again tomorrow. Bye.